Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Chag Sameach.
Sameach.
All right. What we talk about when this Shabbat, we won't be doing Parshat HaShavua. We won't be doing the regular order of the Torah portion. In fact, as we talked about, this is what allows, and this year is actually one of those cases where we are going to read the first Aliyah of a Torah portion 8 times, because we have
Can you talk closer to the microphone?
Do you hear better now?
Yep.
Where we have 8 times we're going to be reread the beginning Aliyah in anticipation of finally going to Parshat Achrei Amot, but we don't get it when we read. We didn't get to read the Torah portion, the Shabbat that followed after the previous parsha, because that was the first Shabbat of Pesach. And again, here we go a whole week in anticipation of being reading it, and it's going to be bumped out again for the reading for the last days of Pesach. So we are not going to be reading Parshat Achrei Mot. Rather, we are going to be reading a special Torah portion for the last day of Pesach. So what are we going to talk about if we're not going to talk about the Parshat HaShavua? So the truth is that we're going to talk about something incredibly important that is very often missed when we talk about Pesach. Everybody understands the Seder, highlights the Seder, talks about the Seder. It's a major part of Judaism. Yet, it's only half of the story. Or more accurately, it's only half of the journey. As we talked about in the Pesach crash course, in the Seder crash course, and as we have talked about numerous times leading up to Pesach and on Pesach itself, that this is not a story of what occurred way back when, 3,000 years ago, to our ancestors, and that we are celebrating it. Here we are, 3,000 years later, celebrating it again and mentioning it, by the way, twice a day. But rather, we are not focusing on, the Seder is not focused on an event. And Pesach is not focused on an event. It's not an anniversary of an event. Rather, it is a reminder, it is the beacon, the lighthouse of the journey that we are on every single day. The same journey we have been on for 3,000 years. And every day we're expected to leave our boundaries, which means that every day we're expected to take a step forward. Because yesterday's progress is today's stagnation. Yesterday's liberation is today's imprisonment. The first part of Pesach is focusing on the journey, calibrating the journey by focusing and reminding ourselves where we started from, the point of origin, where we began, how this journey began. But equally as important, and some might even say more important, is the focus that comes in the second half of Pesach, where this journey is headed. And this is crucial and so important, and is oftentimes either completely just dismissed, not focused on, ignored, or oftentimes, even if it is focused on, misunderstood. And so we're going to try to set the record straight in this lesson. So let me explain again. The first part of Pesach helps us understand the journey we are on by reminding us where it all began. Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, and by looking at that story and understanding that story well, we understand what God wants from us and what God is expecting from us as we continue on this journey. Because God did not just liberate us from Egypt because of the moral and a societal injustice of one nation being enslaved to another nation. That unfortunately is commonplace throughout history. We don't see that God directly gets involved, as we read uh, uh, on Pesach, and we is written in the Torah, "O Hanisa Elokim Lavo Lakachas Loigoy Mikerev Goy." Have we ever seen that God has come to take one nation from among another nation? Have we ever seen that God is engaged in geopolitics? So when we are looking at the story of Pesach, or rather the Exodus from Egypt, we have to understand it's not so much a story of simple liberation of one nation being enslaved and then them being free, and therefore we have to show God gratitude because we're otherwise would have been an enslaved nation. Rather, more importantly, we understand that as God tells us very clearly, I am taking you out of Egypt so that you can serve me, which is the general principle in Judaism that we don't believe so much in freedom from, but rather freedom to. Freedom, just for the sake of being free, is not sacred in its own right. Because who says what you're going to do with that freedom? Rather, freedom to, a freedom that leads to you being able to pursue a higher purpose, a greater purpose, a greater service, is what the story of leaving Egypt tells us. That we are not meant to be servants to a human being because we are meant to be servants to God. And the practical implications to us in our lives is that, yes, most of us serve our boss, serve society, etc., in various ways, right? We go and we're shackled to our 9 to 5. We're shackled to societal tropes, etc. And we need to remind ourselves that we are not servants to this. We are not servants to the boss. We are not servants to society. We're servants to God. He is the pinnacle of our hierarchy. And so, if it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to work 9 to 5 and you're not supposed to be a productive member of society, that is all correct. But to be a servant, God says, I freed you from that. Not freed you simply so that you could be free and you could be anarchic and just do whatever you want, but rather I freed you to serve me. So when the crossroads comes, as it does inevitably multiple times a day, between what do I do in this moment? Do I serve what society says is right? Do I serve my boss, et cetera, or do I serve God? And the answer is from the first days of Pesach that our journey is a journey in which we serve God and we show the world how to serve God. But that all is, and this is important, that all is how this journey began. And to a certain degree, as we call it, the Yetziat Mitzrayim, that is the part of the journey, the half of the story as we journey of what we have to leave. We have to leave and liberate ourselves from the shackles and the moors of society for the sake of a higher purpose, a transcendental purpose. That's what we are leaving. That is leaving the point A. But what is the point B that we are heading toward? What is this all for? What is the goal of all this? That is equally as important, if not more important. Where is this headed? And that is built into Pesach as well. It is part of Pesach, except that most people miss it. I actually saw somebody post on Facebook the day after the second Seder, rather the day after the day of the second Seder. Let's call it that it basically Shabbos Sunday, this was Monday. They wrote Passover 2022 in the books. This was their Facebook post. And I'm like, oy vey. The first days of Pesach are over, in fact, but Pesach's not in the books. There's the whole week, and important, the culmination of Pesach, which is coming up in the next weekend, this weekend as we stand now. Pesach is not nearly over after the Seders.
Are you talking about Mashiach?
The second half of the Seder says, where is this journey headed? A fundamental of Judaism. This is not an aspirational idea. It's not a newfangled idea. It's not a Christian idea that Judaism adopted. It is a fundamental of Judaism. A fundamental of Judaism. Let me repeat. A fundamental of Judaism. That we are headed somewhere. That this, in fact, there is not a concept that is more prophesied by the prophets in the book, in the prophets, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Habakkuk, Amos, etc. Go through all the prophets, Nehemiah. There is not a principle that is, or an idea that is more prophesied on than the concept of the Geula Shlema, of the ultimate redemption. Where we are headed, why we are putting so much effort in. We are not here just to live our lives and to live them as good as we can and then game over. We are all working. Society is all working. The trajectory of the world from the get-go. When God created the world, he created it with purpose. He created it with direction. He put the world on a trajectory. It's not just spinning its wheels. We're not all on a hamster wheel. How disappointing, how depressing of an idea is that the world is just on one big hamster wheel and you're all here, you're just here for a certain amount of years, do your best with it, and then, but really in the long run, it doesn't make a difference because the world is just cycling through and it's not heading anywhere. There's nothing really that's happening. You eat, you drink, you be merry, you try to do good in the world, and then you die, and then the next generation dies, and all the generations die, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. So then really, what does it make a difference if I'm good or bad? Who cares? It's all just one big cycle. That's not the Jewish understanding of existence, of reality. Rather, it is heading somewhere. There is a goal. There is a goal. And that goal is the era of Mashiach, and the last days of Pesach focus on this. In fact, by the way, the first days of Pesach talk about it. It's not the lion's share of the conversation, because we do need to be focused on, we need to use the first 2 days to primarily focus on where where we came from. But having said that, it is not when the end the Seder with Elijah's cup and with the 3 most famous words of the Seder, which are L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. What do you think that means? That is because the end of the Seder, just like the end of Pesach, is bookending the beginning, saying we came from somewhere, but we are going somewhere. That's why we're still on a journey. Because we're going somewhere and we haven't gotten there yet. This, by the way, is the primary reason that we don't accept, not the primary reason, but one of the fundamental reasons that we don't accept JC as the Messiah. He can't be the Messiah because we haven't gotten there yet. The journey is not over. Mashiach comes to usher us into the end of the journey.
Yeah, but you have to ask, what satisfaction do you get pursuing a goal that's not pursuable?
So it is. And in fact, We have many signs and
Sorry,
indications that we're
pursuing an end where there is no end.
there isn't it. No. So that's Stuart. That's the point. It is fundamental to Judaism that this will be an end. It will be a clear and defined end, not an end, by the way, to all existence. It's not like we get there, poof, and everything bleaks out. But this project of the world, the reality as we know it, arrives at its culmination, arrives at its completion, and arrives at its fruition. Let's put it this way. We've said this before. God is the perfect creator. He's the perfect everything. And he created this world, and it's such a mess. How does that make sense? How does it make sense that the perfect creator created a world that is such a mess? And we see it in front of our eyes. We don't have to start nitpicking to find why it's a mess. Tragedy, suffering, death, etc., etc. This is not perfection. The answer is because it is an incomplete project. Yes, it is not perfect because it's not done yet. But the difference is, as God said from the very get-go, when he created Adam and Eve, he put them into the garden, la'avda, to work it, to refine it, to cultivate it, to bring it to its perfection. That's the grand partnership. So this world is heading somewhere. There's a trajectory, and it is our job to bring the world towards its trajectory. And we actually had a class on it, a JLI course, that in fact we are getting darn close. And that's the point, Stuart. If there is an end. In fact, the Rebbe anticipated it in the imminent future. Right? This was the driving force of the Rebbe's entire philosophy, was that we want Mashiach now, and that we are standing on the threshold. Now, the Rebbe's got a pretty good track record about things, right? Pretty much everything that the Rebbe instituted that people said are so outlandish and so is never going to work, and it's not a reality, it's not a possibility, all turned out to be, in fact, more than accurate. The Rebbe was right when the rest of the world stood against it. Quite literally, the Rebbe was right when the rest of the world was wrong. And this was the last and most important thing that the Rebbe pushed forward, that we're standing on the threshold. And he brought various signs, various proofs in terms of all the prophecies that were prophesied in Isaiah, et cetera, that on the face of it, you would look at them and say, impossible. In terms of the blind being able to see, and the old being able to be youthful again, and that food should be abundant across the land. You can imagine at the times that they said these prophecies, they seemed so far from reality that it could only be assumed that you know what, these are holy men, they are prophesying it, but there is no indication in reality that this is ever going to be possible to happen. And yet we are now seeing that not only are these various prophecies we laid it out in the JLI course, not only are they possible to happen, but they are in fact imminent based on the trajectory. I refer you back, we do have a recording of that JLI. We don't have enough time to go through it all today, but to your point, Stuart, it is actually statistically more likely that these the various aspects of the perfection of our reality, will come, and not only come, but come imminently, than it is to believe that it won't. Just if you follow the trajectories and the hockey stick graph of positivity rather than the reverse. The bottom line is we have and made incredible strides, and by all statistical indicators, not just religious and not just belief and not just, in a sense, aspirational, but statistical, cold, hard numbers would show that this is more imminent than one would assume just by the hype occurring in the world, including by the fact that even with this war that we see going on between Russia and Ukraine, the fact that such a war has caused the entire world to rally. Even Switzerland has finally come off the bench, right? You cannot use the term anymore. I'm Switzerland, right? Whenever
Well,
your
it's not the
friends,
entire world. I mean, it's Africa doesn't care.
I want to tell you something. Yes, I am being to a certain degree. I'm generalizing, but the point is that what was once upon a time acceptable in humanity is not acceptable anymore in the general scope of things, in a way that we've never saw throughout history. Never throughout history did we see. In fact, again, as I pointed out,
You know what, Rabbi? The day that they start sending rockets from the Palestinian territories into Israel, and the whole world gets all worked up about it, then I'll believe.
okay, so we're not there yet.
No, we're not. We're not close.
But no, we are very close. We are very close. Again, we suffer from, everybody does, from recency bias. But if you take the entire breadth of history into account and you look where the world is now, what Russia is doing to Ukraine, that's not only was that acceptable, that was the modus operandi. Every nation did that. If you were stronger than your neighbor and you had a chance to go and conquer and take, look, every game that you once upon a time played, Risk. What is the game of Risk? What was Napoleon doing? What was every great? If you had to list the 10 greats of history, of ancient history, all the names that rise to prominence are names of people that were bloodthirsty conquerors. Napoleon Bonaparte, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan. What's the common denominator? What made them great? What makes them people that are revered or lauded in history? They looked at the nation next to them and they said, we can take you over, and they did. And the nation that they conquered kind of accepted it. By the way, here's an interesting statistic. I got it off a Snapple cap. They have the Snapple facts. Here's an interesting one. Of the 235 nations that comprise the UN, England has at one point or another invaded 183 of them.
That was on a Snapple cap, huh?
Isn't that interesting? Did you know that? But that was acceptable. Do we consider England the most heinous condemnation that ever existed? No. Because back then, that was normal.
The Israelis hold a special place in their hearts for England.
Now we see that a lot of nations should, right? The point being that there has been a seismic shift in morality and humanity. And that has been because the Jewish people have been a light unto nations in this journey that began at the leaving of Egypt and will be culminated, the journey of all of creation and humanity, with the coming of Mashiach. And we are, and I repeat, darn close if you take the entire span and scope of history into consideration.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm having difficulty with a lot of the concepts here, but one that I can't reconcile, you brought up the subject of war. What about that war of Gog Magog? And why does it have to happen? Where is it in the cosmic march towards Mashiach, and why?
Many people say that it has occurred already. Gog and Magog is World War II. Some say World War II was Gog and Magog. Gog and Magog was a war between basically all of humanity would be wrapped up in this war. Others say that this was, in a sense, the current war of West versus East that has carried on, West versus the Middle East. Uh, uh, and there are certain, depending on how you interpret the words, for example, the Yalkut Shimoni talks about where the king of Persia, i.e. Iran, will attack the king uh, uh, of the Aravi, which is Iraq,
Right.
etc., and then the king of Aram, which would be America. It's fascinating. You can look and you can find. Uh, and many others say that this is more a conceptual war, a war of ideas rather than a physical war, but an ideological war. And perhaps this, others can understand this to be the war between democracy and communism. The point being, the
Then it's
main
going on
idea of,
now.
right, the main idea of the war of Gog and
Don't
Magog
buy a house.
is that it is a world disruptive event, which makes the point, shakes everybody out of their complacency or of their acceptance of the what they consider the foundational aspects of society, that these are what 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 underpins reality, and we need to invest in these things. The war of Gog and Magog will shake up all of these uh, um, uh, established norms and remind us, as the famous mashal. We're gonna have to turn that down because I'm getting to class. In fact, move, take the laptop and go and show them that that is one laptop. These are downstairs. But the the famous anecdote, the mashal that is actually in the Talmud way before it became one of Aesop's fables or wherever it is, of the group of people, travelers on a boat, and a storm breaks out on the sea, and they're looking for some refuge, some dry land, and then they see a small island, and they're so excited they get off their boat and they head to the island and they abandon the boat for what they know is now a far more secure refuge. And they light a fire because they're feeling comfortable and safe. And all of a sudden, the entire island begins to tremble and to shake and to sink beneath the surface. And then they realize that, to their horror, that this is in fact not an island, right? But everybody familiar with this fable, with this metaphor, that it is the back of a giant tortoise. And they run and they quickly jump back on to the boat and they sail away just in the nick of time. And the metaphor, this is brought in the Talmud, is to make the point that we are on this boat, the boat of Torah, and we deal with the vicissitudes of history and life and the persecution, etc., etc. And oftentimes we are looking for anything else that seems to be a more stable refuge, be it some kingdom or empire or country that seems to be benevolent to us, or the great refuge of Wall Street. And we say, God, you carried us this far, but now we've got, thank you, but now we're going to get off your boat and we're going to find refuge on this thing. This is far more secure, it's far more grounded. Only to realize that no, that nothing is secure. The only thing that floats above all the turmoil is this lifeboat that we have, the Torah and our Yiddishkeit, and it has held us for 3,000 years. But the point, so that's, Paula, to your point, that is what the war of Gog and Magog is, to make it clear to the entire world that a massive disruptive event. And you can point to a lot of it, or you can just say the confluence of all these things in recent history. The greatest conventional war that's ever existed, the greatest conventional ideological debate that has ever existed. Really, we say in this past century, of the upheavals of all the things that have been established, and it's happened on a global scale because never has the world been so together, as it were, so affected by events. You have all these empires, while we think are we like the Persian and the Greek and the Roman Empire have been, were all the world, right? No, it wasn't all the world because there was a whole other side of the world, the Far East, that had no clue about what was going on in, with the Greeks and the Romans, what have you. But now we have the whole world, and events really have been shaking up the whole world, and has told us time and again that things that we come to rely on as being the foundation of security and reality are in fact not. And more it is becoming clear that wherever you put that pin, that is in fact not the is not the bedrock. There is something underlying. This is part. All these things are part of the tectonic plates. Governments, financial institutions, empires are all on the tectonic plates. They are not the foundation of existence. And yet, the one thing that we can look at, us Jewish people, that has survived every one of these upheavals and has lived to tell the tale, and not only to tell, but have thrived in its way intact, is Atem Hadvekim B'Hashem Elokeichem. You who have held firm to God. Chaim kulchem hayom. You're still all alive today. This was a promise made 3,500 years ago. Which society, which culture, which heritage, at the time that this statement was made from God to the Jewish people, has still survived to the present day, with all the trials and tribulations that we have faced? The answer is none of them. There may be certain places where an obscure nation has not been touched, and therefore they've lasted. But no nation that has been at the epicenter of world events has come back and has thrived the way we have. And we talk about go through all the great empires, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, the Ottomans, etc., etc. And we have outlived them all, and that's not an accident. In fact, that's a historical anomaly. It's not something that's possible, but rather it makes that point about that lifeboat. But all this, let's get back. So the answer is, Paula, again, yes, in the immediate, it seems like the world is still a pretty bad place. And that is true. The world is not yet perfect, nowhere near perfect. Or rather, not nowhere near perfect, very near perfect, but in the immediate, the distance seems tremendous. The distance seems tremendous. But if you would pan out and see how far we've come, it is remarkable, pretty much across the board by every metric of what the difference between today and the time of Mashiach will look like, how much closer we are to that than where we started from. But either way, the point of it, I don't even want to focus on the journey. I want to focus. I use this class to kind of give a preview of what the last days of Pesach are about, which is, in other words, to focus on the end game. What does that look like? What are we looking to accomplish? What does the culmination, what does the era of Mashiach look like? We have 2 days in which we focus on it, and each day we focus on another aspect. We have the 7th of Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach, which starts tonight and into tomorrow. Shvi'i shal Pesach. There is a tradition to spend the entire night tonight awake. Like kind of Shavuot, right?
Yeah.
The night of the Shavuot night, we spend the night. There is a tradition to spend tonight awake. Anybody know what that tradition, why? Why is there such a tradition? What is the reason behind this tradition? Why is Shvi'i Shal Pesach a special day? The answer is Because the
Yehoshua?
7th of Pesach is the anniversary
Um,
of the splitting of the sea, which is what we will read tomorrow in
Right,
Shul.
right, right, right. Oh, darn, I knew that. I knew
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Ugh,
7th day of Pesach is the splitting of the sea.
Shame on me.
Now, here's the thing. We kind of take these stories for granted because we've heard them so often and we kind of just roll with it. But do you ever ask yourself, of all the things that God could have done, why split the sea? You'll say, well, the Jewish people have to get to the other side of it. Well, actually, no, they don't. In fact, not only no, they don't, but they don't. They actually end up back on the same side of the sea that they started on. They did not cross the Red Sea. That is a misnomer. For anybody who says the Jewish people crossed the Red Sea, they never crossed the Red Sea. They, in fact, went from Egypt into the Sinai Desert over the land bridge between the Mediterranean and where the Red Sea ends. If you've ever seen, if you know the map, right? So if my fingers are the bodies of water, right? You have the Mediterranean and you have the two fingers of the Red Sea, right? Over here being Egypt, over here being Israel. So they entered into the Red Sea here, came out on the same side, and then went over under the Mediterranean and over the Red Sea. In other words, to the north of the Red Sea, to the south of the Mediterranean, into the Sinai Desert, did their 40 years of wandering there, then came up into the land of Israel. They did not cross into the Red Sea to get to the Sinai Desert. In other words, the only reason God split the Red Sea was to do one thing and one thing only, to get rid of the
Fuck the
Egyptians.
Egyptians.
To get rid of, yeah,
Get rid
to,
of the Egyptians, the
and
pursuing
to
Egyptians.
distract them, I would think.
Pretty sure there was a lot of ways for God to have done that. God could have just said, abracadabra, and they would have all dropped that on the spot. It could have, in fact, poofed out of existence.
But the parting of the Red Sea was just like the other plagues. They're designed to show the power of God.
Ah, good, good. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Stuart. And that's part of what we have to understand. What was God? What was the message, right? More than just power.
I
Because again,
started to read something about the significance of the land versus the water. Is that where
Yes.
you're going?
yes. Here's the thing. There could have been a whole bunch of, God got rid of Sodom and Gomorrah in an incredibly bombastic way. He turned over the land. He literally picked up this slice of land that had the 5 cities that made up the Sodom and Gomorrah and its provinces, and he flipped it over while raining down fire and brimstone. That was quite an event, right? And we remember it. History remembers it and calls it Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And fire and brimstone is an expression that has made it into our vernacular. So that is also showing God's power. There's numerous ways of showing God's power. Why specifically this? Why specifically a splitting of the sea and having the Jewish people cross into it and then come out and and do you ever notice that the Torah doubles down, and not only the Torah, but we double down on the factoid that they didn't just cross, but they crossed on dry land, right? And the Jewish people crossed on dry land. This every time the Torah talks about it, the Torah says they didn't just cross, but they crossed on dry land. Why? Were all the Jewish people wearing their Louis Vuittons? They
Probably.
couldn't get them muddy, God forbid.
That's
It had to
right.
be dry land. Why couldn't it be? And they crossed in the split sea, and it was a muddy swamp, but they made it through. Wouldn't
They
that be
were
enough?
stepping
to
on
know?
fish.
Great, but why? There's the becharava. The Torah says this again and again. They crossed Becharava. Now, don't think they just crossed. They crossed on land. They crossed on dry land. What is this whole story? So here's a very fascinating and important point. The sea, the ocean, represents something, and dry land represents something else. They represent two different realities. The hidden reality and the revealed reality. The sea is not just a body of water. Every fish and marine animal would be incredibly insulted if you would refer to the sea as just a body of water. No, it's not. It's an entire world. It's just beneath the water. It's beneath the waves. There's an entire reality. It's just beneath the surface, right? Hence the expression, the tip of the iceberg, right? Where's the rest of the iceberg? Beneath the surface. Your reality, you only see this much, right? Do you realize the iceberg that hit the Titanic, that mammoth piece of ice floating on top of the water that hit the Titanic, do you realize that in general, about 85% of the mass of an iceberg is beneath the surface? Like when you have an ice cube floating on top, look at your ice cube. 85% of it's beneath the surface. Tiny little piece, part of it, a lot of tiny little corners what's sticking up. There's an entire reality beneath the surface. And it's fascinating that this is an incredibly important perspective on reality in general. How do you say nature in Hebrew?
Teva.
Teva. How do you say something that is drowned beneath the waves?
Tva.
Right? Tavua.
Tavua. Yeah.
Same word. Same exact word. Nature is like the surface that is covering over an entire reality. A great Jewish scholar and sage once said that nature is God's way of remaining anonymous. Anybody know the name of this incredibly wise Jewish sage, scholar? His name was Rabbeinu Albert Einstein. Nature is that surface where the whole reality of, where the whole truth of things exists beneath it. We go through our lives looking at this world and assuming this is reality, right? This is reality. The laws of nature, physics, biology, anthropology, all the ologies. Ologies define reality, right? Science defines reality. Here you have, if you had to say who is perhaps the greatest man of science, the name most linked with the smartest, Albert Einstein is either the number one or definitely within the top 5. And Albert Einstein said, science is not reality. Science is the surface of reality.
Mm.
And you need to know this. And when the Jewish people were beginning their journey, God tore apart the facade and revealed to them the truth, showed them the dry land, the truth underlying the reality, underlying the surface of the reality. That's why it doesn't say, what is the terminology? It says, what did God do to the Yam Suf? He separated it, Pridat Yam Suf. What is the term? How do we say splitting of the Red Sea? It's not the word for
Hekara?
splitting. It says kriyat yamsuf. How many of you are familiar with that term? Kriyat yamsuf.
Mhm.
What does the word korea
Likra,
mean
to
in Hebrew?
tear,
Ayin. It means to tear it apart.
tear. Yeah.
Very weird choice of words. You don't tear water apart, right? That is probably the least accurate word to use about water. You don't tear water apart. And yet, kriyat yamsuf, it's making a point, ladies and gentlemen. God is telling the Jewish people that this journey that you are about to undertake, let me show you what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to find the reality underlying the reality. The truth that exists beneath the surface. You've got to be looking at the world and tell the world, poser, that this is a play. This is a stage performance. There is a deeper reality here. I join Albert Einstein and looking at the world and looking at nature and saying, you are just skin deep. And God says, I've made you Mamlechet Kohanim. I've made you the light unto nations to teach this point to the world. Without this, by the way, morality doesn't exist. There's no need for morality. There's the need for the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. Darwin is right. Hitler would be right. That we poisoned the world, us Jews, with the concept of conscience and morality. Nothing in the laws of nature demands that. You don't see morality in a leopard and a baboon. Morality, and the fact that to us morality is the most important thing, is because we all recognize deep down that there's more to reality than what's on the surface, than what nature is. That's the journey, to refine, to elevate, to show everybody there's more here that meets the eye. That when later the waters come back and cover over, that we set as our mission to slowly pull them back for good. The mind, as we say, the turbulent waters that we each deal with. What allows each and every one of us to deal with the turbulent waters of life? The understanding that this is just on the surface. This is just on the surface. This is, in fact, not the entirety of reality. This is not what defines reality. Stock market crashes, okay. My boss fires me, okay. There's a pandemic and nobody knows what's going to happen. We can ride through it. We'll make it through to the other end. This is liberation. Think about it. This is liberation. More than anything else. I am not shackled. I am not imprisoned by the very limiting walls of this nature, of this limited reality. I see deeper. I know deeper. I can transcend. This is what the seventh day of Pesach is about. The seventh day of Pesach is about the perspective. Is about, and this is why, by the way, while the facade of reality was torn off, and everybody was able to see truth clearly on dry land, absolutely clear. That is why they were able to say Zek in the Az Yashir, right, which is the song of the sea. The Jewish people said, Zek Heli Vameo, this is my God. They were able to point, and as the Talmud clarifies, that what the most simple person crossing the Red Sea, we're not talking about the great scholars and sages, what a child and a maidservant was able to see in terms of godly revelation while crossing the sea, not even the prophet Ezekiel got to see. It was such a moment of revelation. They were literally able to point and say, there is God. It was that clear. They had a preview and a taste, and we are working on it ever since.
Maybe having that vision, that thought in front of you might allow you to better handle all of the stuff you have to do to overcome whatever
Right.
is plaguing you. You should excuse the expression at the moment.
Exactly right, Paula. How many of you have had a nightmare, and it's been absolutely impossible to deal with until you realize some part of your consciousness kicks in and you say, oh, this is just a nightmare, right? This is a bad dream. This is not reality, right? What happens in that very moment?
You wake up.
You can handle. No, sometimes you wake up, sometimes you continue, but you're able to handle it.
You're relieved. Yeah.
You're able to handle it. Comes David HaMelech, and what does David HaMelech say? We say it every time we do the Birkat Hamazon. Hayinu kecholmin.
Calming.
What do you think he means when he's saying that? We were like
We were
dreamers.
dreamers.
This is a nightmare. This is not reality. Not that it's radically different, but oftentimes our dreams are very similar to our reality. Sometimes your dream is that you're fixing a go-kart on a cloud with your boss, right? But most times it's actually things that seem very close to reality because they are. But in fact it's not. It's still a lie. This world is close to reality. It's not like this world is going to be, that with times of Mashiach are going to be radically different. And that's the point of the second day of this process. The last day of Pesach. The last day of Pesach is the famous prophecy, the one that is inscribed on the walls of the UN. They believe that's a reality that we have to work toward. Whether they're doing a good job of it or not,
Thank you.
right, is a different story.
Right.
But they set for themselves the same goal because deep down everybody knows this is a journey and we're heading towards there. Could you imagine the greatest collaboration of global nations in history puts what as their determined goal? What do they engrave as the goal of this effort? Again, whether they're doing a good job or not is a different story. But what do they put down as their stated goal, their mission statement of this greatest collaboration of human beings in history?
Swords into plowshares.
The Haftorah that we will read on the last day of Pesach. No longer will nation raise sword onto nation or do war. Rather, they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning forks. And then the world will fill with the knowledge of God like the waters cover the sea. Do you see how everything falls into place? That is the expression. Like the waters cover the sea. Hey, we just mentioned that in the same context. This is all one big, perfectly engineered puzzle. Every piece falls into place. And the point is, ladies and gentlemen, that the ball is in our court. This is not aspirational. This is a mission statement. And as me and you, and by the very fact that we teach morality and proper ethos as per the Torah, is us playing our role. Every mitzvah that we do is us taking something of this physical world and elevating it and refining it. And once a year, we need to spend a day in a seminar-like circumstance where we can ponder it, we can discuss it, we can analyze it, we can discuss it. Anything that is worth pursuing has a seminar, a conference, a discussion. So where is the Mashiach seminar? The Mashiach symposium? And the answer is on the last minutes of Pesach, just like there's the Exodus symposium on the first days of Pesach. We call that the Seder. We sit down and have a symposium with our family and our children, and we discuss what Exodus and liberation is from a Jewish perspective. The last minutes of Pesach, established from the Baal Shem Tov, we're talking about 100-year-old tradition, to have Seudat Mashiach, the Feast of Mashiach, because Jews do their symposiums over food. That's a general rule. That's you can't what's it called? But we will have it at the Chabad house, as every Chabad house and many other synagogues throughout the world will have in the last moments of Pesach. I strongly recommend wherever you are in the world that you participate in this. It will be fascinating, it will be empowering, and most importantly, it's important. Too many people complain that Judaism is a very backward-looking religion. It's all about ancient history and things that occurred in the past. It's not forward-thinking enough. And they're wrong, except that they're right, because we don't put enough focus on the parts of Judaism that look to the future. So I am challenging you all to participate in this future conference that we are going to have here at Chabad at 7 p.m. on Shabbos. The last minutes of Pesach, the bookend to the Seder. Seder was in the first moments of Pesach, and this is in the last moments of Pesach. And it is traditional to have matzah and wine, just like the Seder night. And the focus and the conversation is on Mashiach and what that looks like. Not the aspiration, not the general, we hope, and times are difficult and Mashiach should come and make life better. No, the actuality of it, the reality. And this to make it a reality to you. It is reality as far as Judaism is concerned. According to the Rambam, who is the codifier of Judaism, it's one of the 13 basic principles of Judaism. The belief in the imminent arrival of Mashiach and what that means. And if you're puzzled by it or if you're bothered by it, then you, of all people, have to come to the Mashiach Suda and face this and engage in this, because it is part of your heritage. It is part of your identity as a Jew. And if you don't know about it, or the topic concerns you or scares you, then you need to come and learn more about it, because mostly it's about the fear of the unknown. The more you know, the less you'll be afraid of it. Right? The old joke, a fellow comes home from the shul in the shtetl, and he says, Rachel, he says, Aya brach. Says, terrible news. He says, what? For years now, we've been trying to make ends meet. It's been difficult, etc., etc. Finally, things are going smoothly. We're able to buy a house and put aside a dowry for our daughters, and my business is going okay. And everything is good just as it is. And then I walk into the shul today on Pesach, and the rabbi says, Mashiach is coming, and we're going to pack our bags, and we're going to go and pick up and leave to Eretz Yisrael. It's upheaval, craziness. So his wife turns to him and says, Chaim ke, don't worry. Jews live through a lot of tsaras. We'll live through this one as well. We have to know more about it to realize how real this is and how much deep down, not even deep down on the surface, this is everything we're hoping for. Every one of you who's working to make the world a better place, this is what you're working toward. And what defines a better place, just like any destination defines the journey. We are defining what the better place world, the whole world is defining what a better place is based on this prophecy from Isaiah about what the times of Mashiach look like. How are you driving your car towards a destination without knowing that much about it? So come, I beg, plead, cajole, challenge you, whatever it is, find
Helen
out
and I
where
will come tonight.
good to the Mashiach Suda in your town and engage. And if you have hesitations and you have reservations, bring them up. You're allowed to. That's part of it. But that's the point of this. This is a Mashiach symposium on the last day of Pesach. So I strongly recommend you participate. All right. So I'm going to put you all on the spot. Those of you
Amazing,
that are
Rabbi.
contestants, Paula, Sudi, if Ellen is doing well and you have the time, Stuart, Diane, all make a point of coming out. It's only for an hour and about 20 minutes till the end of Pesach. I promise you it will be the most uplifting way of spending that last hour and a half of Pesach. I strongly
What time
recommend.
is
No, I
it?
don't.
What
What?
time is it?
7 p.m. 7 p.m. on Shabbos. 7 p.m. Shabbos. Come out, participate in this very special. This year, JLI has produced an incredible packet to go along with it. So it will be very well presented. We'll all do it together. It is a beautiful thing. I strongly recommend. It always is
There's a special song I read,
yeah, no, there's a lot of there's
the
there's
Mashiach song or something.
there's a whole repertoire. There's a whole repertoire.
So Rabbi, before you go, we were trying to figure out what is when you record these classes, and sometimes when I beg you, you send me one.
Chabad of Bethesda has a YouTube channel. And you can find them on the YouTube channel. Just if you go and search Chabad of Bethesda, you'll be on YouTube, you'll be able to find it, and all this gets posted. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
That's very useful information. Thank you, Rabbi, for today's lesson.
Thank you.
It's really
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely, everybody. All the very best. Chag
Bye.
Sameach. Again, Yiskar.
Sameach.
Remind those who need to say Yiskar. Yiskar will be Saturday day, right after the Torah reading. So Shabbos day, whenever, don't forget Yiskar as well. All right, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach. Shabbat
Bye,
Shalom.
everyone.
Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.
All the
Bye.
best.